Welcome, everybody, to What the Tech, episode 80. I am Andrew Zarian, joined by the magical Paul Thurrott.
Wow.
Magical.
All right.
Or I don't know. I've said everything.
Or the insane Paul Thurrott.
Yeah, that sees things, yeah.
Yeah. I've been trying to reread this now. I sent it to you and I kind of looked through it to verify what I thought it said, and I still don't see it.
So did it change by the time you sent it to me? And we're going to get to the audience. We're going to let the audience know what this is. But do you think it got modified?
No, it's far more likely that I have made a mistake.
Oh.
Let me read what I wrote. Maybe I should do that.
All right, let's watch Paul read.
We'll get to this.
Yeah,
anyway.
Reading with Paul.
Whatever happens.
What we're discussing is the ultrabooks. I've heard the name for some time, but I guess it got picked up again the last couple of weeks. Everybody's been discussing these ultrabooks, and Intel is behind the ultrabook movement to kind of defeat the unbelievable, super fast, blazing MacBook Air, right?
And the beautiful MacBook Air.
And the beautiful, yes, yeah,
right?
The beautiful.
Anyone who's seen one of these things,
yeah,
even my
it is
wife,
beautiful.
who can't stand Apple, saw the MacBook
can't.
Air and said, "I get it. This thing is really nice."
Yeah, but it never appealed to me because it's so slow. I mean, now they're a lot faster, but
yeah, they were okay before, but yeah, now I assume they're much faster. 2-generation processor bump and more RAM and all that. It should be a big change.
All right, I'm gonna go to Apple, and I forgot what the highest package.
You can get an i7 in that.
Yeah, which is not bad.
13-inch. Actually, probably even in the 11-inch.
Yeah, that's not bad at all. I mean, if you think about it.
13-inch i7. They're lower end, maybe even low voltage versions of the processors.
So you're talking about $1,800.
Oh yes.
Yeah, you're talking about $1,800 with the i7. I mean, yeah, nice, but it's a little pricey. But I'm trying to think what would be an $1,800 PC.
Right. You mean in a laptop?
Like in a laptop, yeah, like an $1,800. Dell or whatever.
Well, you could spend $1,800 on a ThinkPad if you really went nuts with it. I'm sure the workstation class ThinkPads in particular get up there. But yeah, you'd have to try really hard. You couldn't walk into a Best Buy and get an $1,800 PC laptop. There's no way.
Before I got my Mac, probably the laptop that I had was 3 years old. So we're talking 6 years. So it's about 7 years ago I bought my other laptop before I got my Mac. No, about 6 years. So I was used to spending over $1,000 on a laptop. So I went in with the notion and the mentality where, well, I already spent $1,000 on a laptop, so I'll just get a Mac. I don't understand the price difference. And when I went to and I started the network and I bought all these laptops, I'm like, you know what? I can't imagine spending $1,000 on a laptop.
Sure.
I mean, everything I need would be well under $1,000. So
I suppose, I don't even know, this is probably a separate conversation, but, I have gotten into this debate with people, I'll say, and this will be a friendly thing with people I actually know, where you're at dinner maybe, and someone says, yeah, Macs are expensive, but come on, I mean, you get what you pay for, and there's all this added value and everything. And I said, that's cute and everything, but it really, the thing is, it's beautiful to look at, but what you're paying for up front is the types of things that you can pay for optionally on a PC, like the support. Macs have great support for 1 year, and then you pay extra after that.
You're still not getting Office.
No. But I mean, the types of things that people use to justify that expense are, I think they need to understand what they're really getting there. And Apple does have great support. They really do. Although I guess you've had your own experiences with that.
Yeah.
That said, they're expensive. I mean, they're just expensive.
Sure.
I think it's sort of like religion or politics. If you just say to me, look, I get it. They're more expensive, but you know what? I can afford them, and I like the way they look, and I don't care. Yeah, that is a perfectly valid reason to buy a Mac. So that's honest.
I got the MacBook Pro, and I got the i7. I got the 13-inch i7, and I did price it against a 13-inch i7, and it would have been an HP, I think, if I had gotten something similar to it. And the pricing wasn't that off. Like, we're not talking hundreds of dollars.
You probably priced it to an HP Envy, which is a very high-end machine for HP and looks a lot like the MacBook series. So, yeah.
That's exactly what I priced it against.
Those are expensive machines, absolutely.
I mean, they're beautiful.
They're packaged, whatever it's worth. I just happen to have one coming through recently for a Microsoft project that I did. They're packaged very nicely too, and I think are meant to design or to emulate the way that Apple packages their products. It's designed as a high-end product. It's got the Beats speakers and all that stuff. So you could buy a normal HP Pavilion, whatever they call it, for a lot less than that. I would say with similar specs.
Regardless of what you buy, I think it comes down to what you want to spend, right? So I don't think people are buying Macs if they don't have the money to buy a Mac, right?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, we live in a country where people buy houses that they can't afford
Yeah.
to buy, and everyone has to have 2 cars that they can't afford.
I guess you're
So
right with that. People are
it's
getting
kind of hard. It's hard to say what people can and cannot afford. I mean, I don't know. I think that they're expensive. I mean, I just
Do you think they're
expensive.
overly expensive, or do you think it's just maybe a couple $100 more than it should be? Like, where would you see a MacBook Pro's pricing be?
Right. So I don't think it matters what I think, because they sell really well.
Yeah.
And Apple makes a lot of money on them. So I guess I could debate this forever. It doesn't really matter what I think. I mean, could Apple sell more of them at a lower price? Obviously. But I think Apple has this kind of quality / price bar that they don't like to cross. And I think it has helped their brand by remaining true to that sort of ideal, that they are in this way sort of like the BMW or the Mercedes, or however you want to say it, of the computer world.
But you're still getting the same parts that are inside of a Ford. Just the outsides are a lot better. I mean, that's the funny thing.
Yeah,
but that's the reality of it. I mean, before, I guess that was the mystique about a Mac, that it had, it was Mac components. It was their own components, even though, wasn't really, but it was.
Yes.
Now it's the same thing you could find inside of an HP or a Dell.
I think there's still some advantage to the notion that this company makes the hardware and the software. I realize the components are, what they are. They're off-the-shelf PC parts. But, by restricting the components they use in a Mac to a subset of what's available in the PC world, they're ensuring a high level of compatibility and performance and so forth. And they can tune their OS software in ways that Microsoft really can't, because, it is such a limited subset. I'm not saying it's the better model, but it certainly is a model that has lasted and is equally valid compared to what Microsoft did with partnering with other companies on the PC side. So, yes, I think we can look at that market and say, wow, Microsoft really won big here. And it's possible that as we move forward to smartphones and tablets, that this model may persevere again, maybe not for Microsoft, maybe for Google with Android or whatever it is. But, Apple throughout all this has maintained a very healthy, well, maybe not through all of it, but, Apple, at least in the end, has worked out to have such a healthy market for their products. So, there's no point in disagreeing with it. I mean, I can see advantages to both approaches, but certainly Apple's been very successful.
I mean, in my opinion, I think it's you said it absolutely perfectly. It comes down to what you're willing to spend and what you like.
Yeah.
Because in the end, they all do the same thing, and they all pretty much do it the same way, and you're not getting. That whole idea, you're absolutely right, and I think this was the point you were trying to make, and I agree with you. The idea where, well, you get so much more with a Mac, and that's why it's the same. That's why it's a couple $100 more, but you're really not.
In some ways, you get less with a Mac, but
and I'm trying to figure out.
That's part of the plan, right? This thing has been curated in some way,
and I'm trying to think like what they're talking about, and I guess they're talking about iLife. That's the more that you get.
I guess so.
And I'm a Mac user. I like my
I've written
Mac.
a book about digital media stuff. I love this stuff. The truth is, I don't spend a lot of time on it in my daily life. I'm sorry, and I don't believe that many people do. You know, it's nice that you can make DVDs and home movies that have, trailers now, which is ridiculous in iMovie or whatever. iPhoto is fine, but I'm sorry. I just don't. I use Windows Photo Gallery, Windows Live Photo Gallery. I boot the thing up to download pictures from my camera. I put them online where they belong, and then I sort of stop dealing with that. Red eye works fine. Red eye reduction works fine in any of these applications. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you can put on top of these things, but in the end, what you're doing is wasting a lot of time, I think, managing files on a computer, essentially, when you should be out living your life and enjoying the things that are in those pictures you're so proud of with the computer. I just don't understand I don't know. It's the type of thing that appeals to young people, and I think it's the type of thing you just grow out of. So iLife is great. I don't mean anything to the contrary. I just don't think it's essential, and I don't I don't know. It just doesn't.
I'm just, sometimes I wonder, like, if I could think like how my wife thinks when it comes to computers,
Yeah, oh,
how I
absolutely.
would see things. Like,
Yep.
I may be blown away by iTunes on Windows. Like, who knows?
Mm-hmm.
I may think it's the greatest piece of software. Like, I always wonder, like, yeah, we can be cynical at times and we can pick at certain things, but what is the average computer user that really doesn't understand how these things work and doesn't really care if they have the latest version of, Windows? How do they see computing?
Well, I mean, yeah. So I also use my wife to try to understand this. I had lunch with a friend yesterday, and a couple of years ago, I had helped him with his ancient, even then, Dell laptop where it just wasn't running right. He was getting all these pop-ups, and I said, just bring it to me. I'll wipe the thing out. I'll back up all your data. I'll bring it back to life. And I ended up just reinstalling Windows and putting Office on there and all that. And so we had lunch the other day, and he said, hey, I hate to bother you with this kind of thing, but my computer's slowed down again, and could you look at it again? And so one of the conversations we had around this was, well, what do you do with your computer? And, the truth is, because I'm thinking, maybe at this point you need a new PC, right? Maybe you should move ahead. But the truth is he doesn't do that much with it. And frankly, an XP class computer with a browser is basically all he needs. The only thing he wanted me to back up on that entire computer, and this is amazing to me, but is his favorites from the browser.
Yeah.
That's all he cared about. He said that everything else he had was, all his emails online. He doesn't have to worry about that stuff. The the photos he has are somewhere online. He doesn't care about that.
And that's the one thing I always forget to back up.
Oh yeah.
That's the one. And I have to go searching on another computer that might have something from like 3 years ago to at least recover some of it. But it is interesting. I want to go back to the ultrabooks though. We really went off on a tangent, huh? We were talking about.
Right. I'm sorry. Are we supposed to be talking about ultrabooks?
But the ultrabooks, I guess this is a new class that they're going to try competing with the MacBook Air. I know Samsung has something that's I don't know if they're calling it an ultrabook, but it's been out for some time. Intel is really pushing this.
Well, the Samsung thing, in my mind, is not an ultrabook because it's not thin enough. One of the qualifications for these ultrabooks is that they have to be really thin. In fact, up to 1/3 the thinness, if you will, of a MacBook Air, which if you've ever seen is amazingly thin.
Yeah.
In fact, one thing that might be very educational for anybody to do, as much as I typically would warn you against doing this, is to walk into an Apple store and there'll be two tables, and on one table will be this MacBook Air and at the next table will be the regular MacBook Pros. And you can try to pick up with one hand the 13-inch versions of both. The 13-inch MacBook Pro, which is not a particularly heavy computer, compared to the MacBook Air, it's like picking up a lead brick.
Oh no, you're absolutely right. It's obscenely heavy compared to what
crazy.
The Air is like, and you sometimes wonder. I mean, it's scary how light. The first time I picked up the Air, I was really taken back because I did not expect it to be that light. And they say, well, how much does it weigh? It's like I
don't even know. It's as light as a box of tissue.
Sure.
No, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's crazy how light it is.
I can't wait for that.
It's lighter than your breath.
I can't wait for Steve Jobs to hold one Kleenex and say, "This is how light it is."
Exactly. Which one of these do you think will hit the ground first? Yeah, and the MacBook Air will just kind of slow.
So the Ultrabook, it's a new classification. A lot of people are saying because netbook sales have slowed down, this is just another market for PC manufacturers.
That's an entirely viable way to look at it. Although I think the important distinction between a netbook and an ultrabook, aside from the fact, well, actually, maybe the distinction is the price, right? Netbooks are very inexpensive, and this is really a case of you do get what you pay for. $300 for a computer, and typically it's not going to be a great experience.
Yeah, I have a Lenovo. I forgot the model. I got it for my wife, and it's it's 1.6 gigahertz, and the thing is off. It's awful.
Yeah, it's terrible. In fact, I bought that Lenovo because I love ThinkPads, and I wanted something that was thin and light and I could carry around. And I bought the most recent version, I think, the one that came out in January, the 120E, I think it was. And I returned it. It was terrible. It was almost completely unbearable from a performance perspective.
I'm trying to find the model, the one that I have. The reason why I got that Lenovo, I think it's the idea.
Not an X100. It was just a.
Yeah, it's the S series. I got the S series.
Oh, the S series, the IdeaPad.
Yeah, the IdeaPad S series. The reason why I got it is because my wife wanted the tablet version of it.
Yes.
And I told her, I'm like, you're not going to be, it's not what you think it is.
It's not going to be a happy experience.
Yeah, and it's not that, it's running Windows 7, but it's the screen itself is not a great screen. So I ended up getting the other one, and she takes it here and there because she has a big Lenovo ThinkPad. So it was a big difference for her to take this little thing, but it's still awful. It's slow, it's sluggish.
I've had a few of those. Yeah, as well. So yeah.
So this is just another market for.
I think it makes sense for both Intel and for people who buy PCs to spend a little more money, right? Mm-hmm. That you get a much better computer for that kind of money. And I would say in the $500 to $600 range, there are actually plenty of mainstream laptop computers that are fine. My wife uses one. I think her computer cost about $625 when we bought it, and it's actually a very thin and light computer for whatever that's worth. Just your typical Dell Vostro, I think V13 is the model. It's fine. It's exactly what she wants. It's fine. But I think what Intel's trying to do with the Ultrabook is say somewhere between there and $1,000, there's this new class of computer that can look a lot like a MacBook Air and be super thin, super light, get really good battery life, really good instant-on type performance. That this is a good new market. That it's not just a laptop. It's not. We have this notion of thin and light computers, or netbooks. It's a new thing.
So it has to be under 3 pounds.
Yeah.
The MacBook Air is 2.96, so let's say 3 pounds. So I guess it has to be under 3 pounds. Mm-hmm. Do they all have to feature SSDs? Is that part of the?
They would have to because of the thinness.
Okay.
They are going to use the latest version of first the Sandy Bridge ultra low voltage, then eventually the Ivory Bridge that are designed to be very, very thin and heat efficient.
Okay.
They have to have I believe they have to be 13-inch. I think it's 11 to 13-inch screens.
11 to 13-inch, yeah.
So same as the MacBook Air again.
And I'm looking at the Acer Aspire 3951 that they're saying is going to be released in October. $770 to $960, $960.
Yeah, right in that
ideal
in that price range, right?
I mean, I think it's an interesting market, and it's an interesting thing because if I'm looking to buy this and I'm saying, okay, well, I have a couple $100 to spend on it, I would probably get something like that.
Who wouldn't want to spend a little bit more for something that's way more nice looking and way lighter and still gets great performance?
And I'll tell you, if my choices are to spend $1,000 on an i7 ultra thin, ultrabook, or get another MacBook Pro, which is going to cost me probably $1,700-$1,800 for the same thing, and I'm a Mac user, I have a MacBook Pro, I would probably, rather than going with the MacBook Air, I would go with the whatever the device is, the Ultrabook.
Yeah, I mean, and the nice thing is they're maintaining that price point between PCs and Macs, right? Because MacBook Airs, of course, start at $999.
Yeah, which
is where these other computers should kind of start petering out. We'll see.
Smart. They would have to be cheaper. They would have to be because kind of everybody that sees this device, not everybody, but I think a lot of people are going to say, "Oh, look, it looks like the MacBook Air." So
it looks exactly like the MacBook Air.
So if you're not being competitive and being aggressive with your pricing. They might go and just get the MacBook Air.
Sure. I hate to.
Tell me if I'm wrong, though. I mean,
no, you're right. No, you are right. I mean, I guess the problem is it positions the PC as like the sloppy seconds of the, portable computer world. It's like what we all really want is this MacBook Air, but this is kind of expensive. So we have these, Korean and other Far East manufacturers that can make these things that look just like a MacBook Air, but they're really cheap, comparatively, and it's kind of a tough place to be in some
here's
ways.
The disadvantage, though, Paul. And I'll tell you, we have one of the guys on the network, Spencer. He does a show from Los Angeles. He has a studio in L.A. And he bought a Mac Pro. He has an 8-core Mac Pro. I mean, the thing is, it's an unbelievable machine, and that's what he uses.
$3,700.
Yeah, it's an obscenely expensive machine, but it's a great machine, and he uses it for a lot of other editing stuff. So, okay, he got it. And he's recently changed a lot of his setup, and we've been working on getting his video in high resolution and all these different things. He can't run the software that would make it a lot easier for him to do the show because the software does not exist for a Mac. And the software that does exist for a Mac is not as good as the software that he should be using. So we're going to have to do boot camp and run Windows on there so he could run the software.
Wow.
If I was in that situation, I would have just bought a Windows machine.
Just for this purpose,
For this
almost. I mean,
purpose. For this purpose, I would
sure.
buy a Windows machine. But I do think that this same problem will exist for a lot of other people. If you are a Windows user and you use a specific program and you're kind of attached to it, you're not going to want to go to get a Mac. And the same goes for a Mac user. You're not going to want to come to Windows. So I think that distance is there. I think a lot
that's
of
going to
people
go
see
away.
it.
You know, and maybe the dividing line occurs. I don't know when it is exactly, but whenever Windows XP goes out of support, there's an interesting thing that occurs there, because right now we have virtualization solutions that allow people who are individuals or who work for companies to utilize software that runs on an older version of Windows. But when Windows XP isn't supported anymore, technically speaking at least, and maybe they'll force the issue, that won't be a thing that you can do anymore. And maybe at that point that software starts really going away finally, just like MS-DOS finally went away after kicking and screaming for several years in a row there. And maybe that's how that stuff happens. You know, that the person you're talking about from LA has a very specific need, but I think the other thing that's going to occur over the intervening couple of years is that those needs kind of go away too, because most people don't have that kind of a specialized software need, and a lot of the stuff we're doing is increasingly web-based. And I don't know. You know, I spent some time recently this week looking at online picture editors, wondering if that would be a viable alternative to installing all of this really heavy software.
You mean it would be on the cloud?
Yeah. And for me personally, it's not quite there. I have very specific needs. Of course, I take screenshots for articles that I post on the web, and this is not really the same thing same needs that a lot of people have. But you know, for typical consumers who have the occasional photo that maybe they, like I said, want to do red eye reduction, whatever. You know, this stuff is out there.
But I mean, I guess it would be good for someone that does not have the CPU power and someone like a netbook. And if there is something that's a little bit more powerful and on the cloud, I can see that working for them.
My picture froze in Skype.
Did it? Oh, I don't know if that no, that's an old Paul. That's from like 2 weeks ago.
Oddly looking exactly the same.
Yeah. Let's see. Where was it? There we go. The look of disapproval.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I can see there's different stuff on my desk.
Yeah. The look of disapproval, Paul. We're gonna start playing that. Like whenever someone says something that they shouldn't on the network, I'm just gonna put that picture up from now on.
What the hell's wrong with you?
Yeah. Let's go. There you go. Look at that. Disapproval. It is interesting how they've created this new market, but I don't know. You know, there's something still missing, and I don't know if I'm crazy to think this, but there was a device that Lenovo put out a couple of years ago, and I think it was at CES, and I was blown away by this by the device. It was a laptop that became a tablet.
So they never actually released that.
It never came out. The UI, was it the U1 or the UI?
U1 sounds correct. It was the problem with it was that it had sort of an Android-based OS that was in the screen part of it.
Yeah.
But it was running a custom Lenovo environment. And it looked really neat, but I remember saying to them, you know, at the time, I don't understand why you're not just going with like a standard Android thing. And apparently I wasn't the only one, so they ended up scratching it a few months later for that reason. And it's possible we may still see something like that, or that eventually Windows 8 will come out and they won't have to do that, because one of the things I read into this blog post that Intel did recently about the ultrabook was the possibility that, thanks to the thinness of the Intel components that will be going into this, that if you think about how a typical laptop works today, you know, the guts of the computer are under the keyboard. But why couldn't they be under this screen? You know, and that both sides could have their own batteries, and that when you were just carrying around the screen by itself, it could work like an iPad but running Windows 8, and that when you plugged it into the keyboard, it would be a full-fledged Windows 8.
But wouldn't that be the perfect device for Windows 8? Because they are saying that it is going to be both in one.
Absolutely. In fact, regardless of whether this is part of the ultrabook spec or part of the expectations for an ultrabook, I would imagine that 1 year from today, the laptop I'm using will be that type of machine. It will be a tablet that has a keyboard dock, or it will just be an ultrabook where that's how this thing is configured. Either way, but I fully expect that will be the case.
But shouldn't that be where computing is going? The future of the laptop. It doesn't make sense to have and maybe I'll probably get emails saying you're an idiot for this, like I did last week. But
sure,
it doesn't make sense to have an iPad, have a tablet, and have the laptop, and have a netbook, and have for all these different mobile needs when you could have. Well, a 10-inch or whatever it is, and you pop the screen off and you use it.
There are people like us who are going to overbuy technology, but there are people who won't, normal people. And for them, I think the decision is going to come down to, does an iPad or something like an iPad, optionally with some sort of a keyboard, make more sense than buying a computer? And at that point, the decision obviously comes down to things like price and what they used this machine for, but also the types of things, or actually it's the same thing, but how they use the computer. So I happen to do a lot of writing. I think we might have talked about this recently. I'm always going to need something that has a really good keyboard. So the keyboard can't be an afterthought for me. But for the type of people who are just writing emails and browsing the web, the keyboard's an afterthought. It's fine. It doesn't have to be great. It doesn't always even have to be there.
I've seen a device for the iPad that was like $50, and it was a small time shop that was selling it, where the iPad actually docks on there and has the keyboard and has everything, and it becomes a MacBook Air, pretty much. Yeah. And it was a great looking device. And when I saw it, I said, "Well, I'm sure they're going to
use it."
I'm sure, and that's exactly what I was going to say. I'm sure when I use it, I'm not going to be happy. It's not going to sit correctly. There's going to be issues with it. But why couldn't a manufacturer that can build something like this?
Apple would have to do that, right? And I think they will, and I think they'll fix this. So I examined this, not for myself, but just to see if it made sense for normal people, whether you get an iPad and you have an iPad keyboard dock, or an iPad and a dock and then a Bluetooth keyboard or whatever. Does this thing make sense, right? Now, for someone like me, where I have to switch between applications very quickly, there's no keyboard combo, at least unless they've changed it, where you can switch between apps running on an iPad from a keyboard. If there were, that would solve, I think, the biggest problem with this scenario, the fact that you actually have to reach up and start flicking around on the screen, which is the very scenario that Apple says doesn't make sense, and the reason they're not doing touchscreens on a Mac. So they need to overcome that. This is a very serious problem, actually. So to me, this makes the iPad a non-starter for this scenario. But that's today. I mean, eventually, either in some iOS 6 that comes down the road, or potentially, as people are predicting, some combination OS that combines the best of OS.
But Microsoft has the advantage here, in my opinion. They're releasing an OS that is intended to do everything we're discussing right now. Absolutely. The OS, if you don't want the tablet look and you don't want the tiles, you just switch it back to classic mode and you have your standard machine. If you do want that, you can experience it.
I would say you don't even have to switch it back to classic mode. I mean, the argument I've tried to make about this UI, having never actually used it, of course, is that it would work equally well if you had just a keyboard and a mouse, or if you were using your hands to touch the screen and so forth, or whatever interface you decided to use. And I think that's what makes that interface very interesting, because it does overcome that issue I was just talking about, which is that using that device as a tablet and touching the screen, and maybe you're sitting on the couch with it and you're zipping around with your finger, that would work fine. But then when you dock that thing onto the keyboard and start typing away, Alt-Tab all of a sudden works, and all the keyboard controls that used to work, and you can mouse around on the thing. And so I think that dual functionality is going to be what puts Windows 8 over the top.
Yeah, and I hope the manufacturers start thinking about this and start getting it ready for the time of the launch, because if they launch, if some sort of device comes out at the same time that Windows 8 is coming out that does this, it would be extremely appealing to many, many people. Not just the enthusiasts, but I think many people would say, wow, this is really interesting that I could have a tablet and a computer.
I think that people who are technology oriented or follow, the tech blogosphere or whatever, discount how many people are out there who want something that is like an iPad but runs Windows. And I know people like to sort of scoff at that or poo-poo it, but I know that there are millions, hundreds of millions probably of people that is exactly what they're looking for. Now, I think the problem with the ultrabook, assuming the ultrabook is that thing, that would be fantastic. But of course, the the first versions of that come out this year and run Windows 7 do not solve that problem. So I think I think it's a legitimate thing to try to make something that is as beautiful and elegant as a MacBook Air, but runs Windows. So we can see that for multiple PC makers. It will at least solve the pricing problem and the Mac OS X problem with the MacBook Air. And that's fine. That's perfectly legitimate. But the truly revolutionary device is going to be the one running Windows 8, where the guts are in the screen. And you can use it like a tablet, or you can use it like a laptop. And that's that best of both worlds scenario, and I think that's what's going to put this stuff over the top.
Do you think there are any issues with creating a device like that?
No.
No, I guess
they've already existed.
Doing it.
I mean, even in the early days of the tablet PC, Compaq, which was bought by HP, so eventually I think when it came out it was called an HP Compaq something, had a Transmeta-based tablet PC where you could dock it onto a pretty lousy keyboard, but it was exactly what I'm describing. And the performance was bad, but that was just because of the processor they chose, the amount of RAM it had, and all that stuff. But it is exactly what we're looking for and asking about. And
see, now the interesting thing is that HP has their own OS.
Yeah.
When things like this start coming around, how are they going to do this? Because they're kind of going to say, our OS is not as good as what Microsoft is doing. So here you go. Buy ours.
Well, I don't imagine they would market it that way.
But I mean, I think everybody would know that, though. I don't think anybody's going to walk into a store and say WebOS is far more superior than Microsoft, than Windows 8.
Well, but it's a different, it's a different market. I mean, the WebOS targets the type of person that wants an iPad. It's that kind of OS. There's nothing wrong with WebOS such as it is. It's just that it's not supported by that same rich ecosystem.
By the way, Staples is selling it for $299. I posted that on Facebook.
I see prices like that. I even, against my own better judgment, actually browse around and look at that and think about it.
Maybe.
I didn't do it. There's a Vizio 8-inch Android tablet you can buy on Amazon also for $299, and I thought, that's kind of interesting. Put a 32 gig, mini SD card in there, and I could just use it to watch movies. And then you sort of slap yourself and wake up and think, that's stupid. What am I
I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, Vizio $299. But you could root this thing.
I know, but why? What am I doing with my life? I mean, I don't why
nothing at all, Paul.
You know what I mean? Like, what's the point? I just don't. I don't know.
You have HDMI. I don't know.
Yeah,
but
I
have no argument.
I got to get the new MacBook Air because it is Thunderbolt. Okay.
What's so funny?
What end is that?
When I bought the MacBook Pro, and I sent the tweet. I'm like, I got the new MacBook Pro. People were saying, you're so lucky you have Thunderbolt. And I would reply back. I would say, really, what can I do with it?
Yeah, exactly. Well, you can buy a $50 cable.
Yes. And
it apparently has some intelligence in it.
And they go, you could hook up 3 monitors together. They gave me some I'm like, okay.
Well, 3 Apple monitors that cost $9.99 each. I mean, I guess I could do that.
And I said, okay, what else? And they go, you could get a hard drive. But I could do that with USB.
Not to dump on this, because I think it's cool that you can do that.
Yeah.
And by the way, those Thunderbolt monitors do act almost like a dock, right? They have more USB ports and all that. But have you ever seen the wiring that's required for these things? Like, it's this bizarre double-headed wire that plugs in on 2 sides of the Mac, and it's like this. It's kind of awful, actually.
Well, I'm kind of upset over this whole thing because I had the previous Mac that I had was mini DVI.
Yeah.
Something they've implemented that nobody in the world is using.
Yep.
So I had to buy the $40 adapter, and when I came back home, I'm like, I'll just plug this in. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is not fitting. So now I have to go back, and there's no mini DVI. There's only
a Thunderbolt.
There's Thunderbolt.
Whatever. But they don't exist, those adapters yet, I don't think.
I think they have something. They have like a converter.
Okay. They will. I mean, mini DVI, or I'm sorry, what were we saying? The mini DisplayPort. Eventually, there was an adapter for everything. You can go to HDMI, you can go to VGA, you can go, whatever. They have all those adapters. So that stuff's all there. And if it's not there for Thunderbolt, it will be, obviously. So.
Yeah, but it was still annoying, and I have to go back there, and I'm banned from the stores.
Put on your disguise so I can buy an adapter at the
Big
Apple
mustache
store.
And a hat. I was going to say put on the Groucho Marx glasses, but I kind of look like Groucho Marx with the eyebrows. Right. So that's not even gonna work for me. Yeah, we spent so much time on the story, and there's so much more to talk about the ultrabooks and the tablets, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it in the coming weeks. But I did want to get to some other stories. I want to talk about how the internet has turned 20.
Right.
Now, the internet existed before 1991.
Yes.
Did that not count?
Well, I believe that the date must be the time at which the internet was turned over to publicly held, not a government entity, right? That it was basically unleashed. And
Really?
that was the beginning of the online era, right? Because before then, wasn't it a governmental / military ownership? It was like DARPA type thing.
I guess because I'm thinking back as a kid, and we had the Tandy in '88, and I remember having Prodigy on there.
Well, but that
unless
wasn't
we got
the
it
internet,
later on,
right? I don't remember. I'll never remember the details of this stuff, but in the mid 1980s, I had access to things like Q-Link and I think CompuServe, maybe on the Commodore 64, and the Delphi service and Prodigy on my wife's IBM PS1, which was an amazing piece of crap. Genie was one of the services, but as things got more sophisticated, I used to connect to local BBSs.
Yeah.
And something called FidoNet. And one of the interesting things about FidoNet, I think, was that some of this stuff was coming from other FidoNets through the internet. And this was always very mysterious and almost, Isaac Asimovian in its science fiction quality. But, the notion was that, you're not just connecting to people in the Boston area at the time or maybe in the Phoenix area later in life. These people could be anywhere in the world, and they were contributing to like a Usenet type thread, although it wasn't Usenet, I don't think at the time. It might have been Gopher or something or whatever.
I don't. What year was this?
I'm all over the map here. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
okay.
So this would have been the very early 1990s on the Amiga in Boston, and then we moved to Phoenix, and I joined BBSs in the Phoenix area, including some developer-oriented ones, specifically just to avoid download limits. I think the basic deal was that you could only download a certain amount every day because you were hogging the line. Remember when you dialed in, you were hogging a line.
Yeah.
I mean, there were a physical number of lines that the ISP could handle.
Yeah, that's why AOL had that problem in the mid to late '90s when you had to call 1,000 times to get through to a line.
Yeah, I was actually a very heavy AOL user for many years. I used to. I don't think it was Usenet. Again, I think it was just AOL's version of a Usenet type interface, and one of the many things you could go in there was buy and sell and trade things, kind of like we do on eBay, I guess. And I used to hang out in that stuff. But
yeah, I'm looking here. 1990, Prodigy started doing it. So yeah, about 1990, 1991, because
Prodigy probably. I think we talked about Prodigy. It wasn't you and I that talked about how Sears had something to do with Prodigy. I think that Prodigy. It might have even launched at the same time or concurrently or on those IBM PS1 computers.
It did.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah.
Because we had it, and my wife had such a machine. And
it was a bundle. It was together.
Yeah.
They would.
I think we
them.
might have even bought this stupid thing at Sears for all I know. Who knows?
Yeah, that makes total sense because I believe they were marketing them together, and that's how they claimed that they had 1 million subscribers. It was some.
It was the most lousy graphical thing. It was weird colors like purple and black and orange and stuff.
It was black and orange, and I remember when you logged in, the screen dissolved.
Yeah, and it was an explosion of like CGA quality graphics. I mean, it was like this crazy, awful looking thing.
But yeah, I guess maybe 1990. But when we talk about the internet, we're talking about WWW. The World Wide Web has turned 20.
I didn't see that until
1991. That's
I didn't see it until later. Well, actually, how much later? It would have been 93, 94, somewhere in that time frame. I remember I had moved to Phoenix, and I was attending and working at a community college in the Phoenix area, and we had full internet. We had a T1, and we had full internet access, and the school's infrastructure was over a VAX machine, like a digital VAX.
Mm-hmm.
Horrible, just antiquated, machine. Command line type stuff. But we had internet, and we could get the Mosaic web browser, and you could access these things online. There wasn't much. It was, in fact, it was Gopher and some other stuff. But there was a class, and I remember I walked into the class, and this guy I later became very good friends with, who was a kid at the time, younger than I was. was started teaching. He was teaching people to get online, and I took one look at him at the time, and I said, you know what, I'm not doing this. If this kid can figure this out,
Yeah.
I can do this myself.
Do you remember what your first website was?
It was literally probably the Mosaic website. I whatever. I'm trying to imagine what the heck it was. I mean, back in this, so the things I remember from this time period was "Who Am I?" I think was like kind of a big thing.
Yeah.
And this notion of people had plan files, and plan files were a Unix or even a VMS type thing, or VMS, I think being the VAX OS, where people would, it was a place where you could write information about yourself. So it was sort of like, if you think about it, a plan file, if I'm getting this right, was very similar to sort of a tweet, except you'd have to know to go look for it.
Yeah.
And there were some famous people of the day, like John Carmack, who was a programming genius from id, who used to update his plan file, so you could find out what he was working on, because there were no blogs and they no real websites, not yet.
Yeah.
But you could look at his plan file, and that's how you would find out what was going on with John Carmack. And I remember thinking that was really impressive, that you could basically hook up with an individual, not hook up with but discover information, up-to-date information about what someone was doing online using this system or of sorts.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting, and I'm thinking back to what I remember. I remember we had AOL for a while, but you would still, I was still able to browse the web.
Yes.
And I remember like looking up bands. Like I was a kid, and I had an older cousin, and we spoke about these bands, and I would look up the bands, and it would always be like this black background website with white text, and that was it.
I always remember. Well, so they were like the blinking star backgrounds.
Yeah,
there was a lot of gray
GeoCities
background. Like just text on gray.
And then the music, when they discovered that they could embed music, every restaurant had Piano Man playing in the background,
like the Italian music at the. Back in those days, in the early '90s, I mean, I would say the AOL stuff was actually visually better looking than what was online by and large, even though you could sort of browse the web inside of AOL. AOL always did a better job in the beginning, and I think that's why people used it, of just presenting information and making it look pretty, comparatively speaking.
But I remember, people that were on AOL, they hung on for a while, and that was the interesting thing to me, that people were still using AOL up until a couple of years ago. They were still using an AOL client.
Yeah,
and I just. It amazed me, and
yeah.
My mother was one of those people.
I had an AOL account for a while. Part of it's email. You don't want to lose that.
Yeah.
That might be, that's part of the attachment. It's kind of the way you interact with people. I mean, I don't recommend it. I guess, I mean, at this point, but
I mean, look at how much has changed, right? And we're still in the internet's infancy. I mean, you're talking 20 years of the internet that we know. Well, the internet that we know, let's say 15 years. And look how much it's evolved, and it's become such a connected resource for everything globally. I mean, you can find out anything you want on the internet now. And before you would have to search. Now you could just, it's simple.
My first, it was in direct interaction, if you will, with this guy, Joe Belfiore, who now runs the Windows Phone team at Microsoft. The first time I ever saw him, I did not actually meet him at this event because I watched it remotely. He was part of a presentation that Microsoft did where they broadcasted over satellite. And in major cities around the U.S., you could actually go to a movie theater and watch this broadcast live, which I did, in a packed theater, by the way. And it was about their browser. And they were talking about where they were going with the browser. They that day released a developer preview of it. They had some crazy chat client they were working on. There was going to be integrated FTP and all this other stuff. And so frames and blah, all this early kind of web stuff. It was very, very exciting at the time. And what's interesting is, if you think, 15 years have gone by, if Microsoft wanted to broadcast something like that today, for one thing, that's not how they would do it. They would just do it on the web. They have technologies like Live Meeting and now Link, where they can have these multicast meetings online repeatedly. They can do it on demand. And they even have a system where now remotely, sitting at your computer, you can do that meeting and then interact with the software they're trying to show you by them sharing the application out to you. Now, of course, that requires a lot of bandwidth. That would probably be the biggest single technical improvement over the last 15 years. But, not just that, but, the type of understanding that occurs through that much experience with this type of bandwidth about the software and services that you can make and how those things can improve.
But I mean, it's amazing how much, and the bandwidth is interesting. What was the standard way of communicating with with Windows? If you were using a Microsoft product 15 years ago, would you say it was NetMeeting?
With Microsoft themselves?
Yeah, like for
No,
on
no.
the what were they using as far as
This was
enterprise
before.
goes?
So Microsoft before the rise of Usenet and before Microsoft had its own Usenet client, right, the internet news client that became Outlook Express, Microsoft used CompuServe for their beta forums, which I actually liked because CompuServe you had to pay for, and it was expensive. You paid for what you used. That was how it worked. So, if you were on for 59 minutes one night, you paid for 59 minutes. You didn't get some monthly, flat fee.
Yeah.
It kept a lot of the riffraff out, which I really enjoyed. And then, later Microsoft moved to just private beta news groups, like Usenet style news groups. And of course that opened it up to a lot more people, which is probably the better approach. But it also meant, the quality of the people who were in there went down dramatically. But as far as a customer goes, no, I mean, back then you'd call Microsoft on the phone. I mean, you could still do that today. But Microsoft has, online help, interactive help, like any other company, not just tech companies. I mean, all companies.
But back to AOL, I mean, look at how much the company has changed in 20 years. Microsoft is still doing what they're doing. They're still pumping out the Windows
That's
machine.
true, right? And AOL is sort of still there. But
AOL is, I mean, it's as if you just somebody bought the name and tagged it on something else. I mean,
it is very much like that. In fact, I think the big change there was that AOL was a powerhouse of sorts. They obviously did very well for very long, and then they merged with Time Warner. And by the time that merger occurred, it was like only Time Warner hadn't heard that the ride was over, right?
Yeah.
And of course, it took them a couple of years, but they finally figured it out. And then they basically spun AOL back off after taking billions of dollars in losses, and now AOL exists. So you can still have an AOL email account. And by the way, for whatever it's worth, I've heard this from a few people. Supposedly the AOL email thing is pretty good. Obviously it's web-based now.
I still have an AOL email just sitting there, and I have
really?
spam going to it, and they still have a desktop client.
Really?
Yeah, I'm looking at it. AOL
Nice.
Desktop 9.6 was released November 2010, and AOL Desktop was July. It just got released July 31st.
Wow.
I don't even.
All
know.
right. Well, I mean, you have to think that that's a sad little part of the company, right? Because that can't be a big part of what they do anymore.
I wonder if I could download this on the Mac. No, it's an exe. I wonder if they have a Mac version.
They have a toolbar. I think part of what
what's
AOL does now is they're just what do you call it, like a destination site, like a portal site.
I'm at their website and they have the AOL Desktop, and there's screenshots of the AOL Desktop client, and it's running Windows XP.
Yikes! Yeah. Well, I mean, the type of person who would run the AOL Desktop probably hasn't been updating.
Yeah.
I mean, AOL Instant Messenger was a big thing for a long time. AIM. That was actually probably a very big deal for them.
Do
Maybe
people still
is.
not use it? I use AIM with everybody that I know in my group of friends, and
So you actually use this?
I use AIM. I have a different client, but I have I think on the Mac it's Audium or whatever it is.
Right,
but
it's compatible. Yeah.
But
I would love to have a good client that worked with all the different.
none of them are good. Trillian had something years ago, and they totally botched it by bloating up the software. But
yeah, Microsoft has destroyed Windows Live Messenger, but unfortunately, that's what everyone I
in
know
your
about.
circle,
Yeah.
you guys don't use AIM.
No.
See, this is so bizarre to me because I guess maybe it's like
I think I think this is just. It's almost a societal thing. There's a certain group of people that uses Yahoo Instant Messenger.
Yeah.
I think that's a big deal. Something like Google Chat, whatever that's called. What is it called?
G-Talk?
G-Talk.
Yeah.
That's never really taken off. But the dream there was that by using Jabber, they would create this sort of universal client. And I've always sort of thought that was a great idea. But, maybe we're just kind of moving on. I don't use Facebook Chat, for example, but I know people use it all the time. In fact, my son's on Facebook Chat with his little girlfriends all the time. Which is
I'm using Jabber in whatever client this is to
communicate back to
via Facebook, and everything just goes into there. But the AIM stuff has been always interesting to me, because I guess it was that maybe it's like a generational thing too, because my younger brothers have never installed AIM. And if they do chat, they chat with Skype, which I think Skype is a horrible chat client.
Oh wait, hold on. You just reminded me of something.
You do have AIM. You've been using AIM this entire time.
No. You know what I did use for a while? It was. Do you remember ICQ?
I haven't. I remember my ICQ number. I have it written somewhere.
It was the little flower icon.
Yeah.
I remember my first co-author's wife had installed it on his PC, and this guy called me up and he said, "Listen, I need you to come over right away." And I said, "Okay." And he says, "Look at this thing." And it was the flower down in the tray. And I said, "Uh-huh." He goes, "Do you know what this is?" And I said, "Nope." He goes, "I've discovered that it's an Israeli company." And I said, "Okay." He says, "I think that this thing is malicious, and we need to deconstruct it and find out what's going on." And he wanted to inspect the network packets and see what it was doing.
Oh my God, that's the greatest thing ever.
Like, all right. So we investigated ICQ. I mean, this is...
Did you have no idea what it was?
No, I'd never even heard of it. It had just come out. Whenever this was, 95-ish.
Yeah.
94 maybe.
It's about right.
It had just came out. And it was very mysterious to this guy and to and to me for a little while. But then you sort of look into it and you're like, it's just a chat client, I mean.
It was, and you know what was interesting about a lot of geeky people loved ICQ. And the reason why I got on ICQ is I had a friend and he was really involved in this stuff. And he pretty much taught me everything that I know about computing. But he was big on ICQ, and he refused to use any other client except for ICQ. And it was so worthless to me, because you had to remember your key. Your special number, which is like 19,845, and then sometimes it was like in the millions your number. And the only way,
you can break this down very simply. I mean, there is the stuff that you do online that is just you looking at stuff, whether it's porn or news or whatever it is. You just browsing the web today, but it wasn't always the web. You could be going on Usenet. I mean, that was a perfectly viable way to find out information. For a while, maybe still is. I don't know. I don't really use it anymore. But then there's the stuff where you interact with other people, and sometimes you do it in real time, and sometimes you're broadcasting stuff to to the world. So ICQ or any of these chat clients solve a need to interact with one or more people in real time. Facebook does it today. Obviously, Facebook also provides that method of posting information, including photos and all that stuff. I mean, I think the reason that Facebook is such a big deal today is because it's basically the AOL of the modern era.
Sure.
And I don't mean that in a critical sense. I mean,
it is.
Because it solves so many of these common communication issues that people want to solve online.
Well, yeah, you could chat, you can meet people, you have member directories, so you can look up people's profiles. It's exactly that.
The problem for any of these services, AIM, Yahoo Messenger, Windows Live Messenger, whatever it is the people you want to communicate with have to be there, or it's not valuable to you at all. So, I mean, anytime someone would latch on to something like ICQ right away, the first thing they would do is email everyone they knew and say, oh, you got to get on this. You got to get on this. Because it's useless until everyone
until everybody's on it. Yeah. It is interesting, but with AIM, I've realized it may be my group of friends and the people around my age, because if I meet someone that is around my age in New York, they use AIM. Anybody younger, maybe even 3 or 4 years younger, they were all on MSN. I think now everybody at this point is on Facebook.
I'm sorry, how old were the people on MSN?
About 3 years younger than me, so maybe now they would be in their 20s.
Are they still using it now, do you think?
No, and nobody that I know is using it. I know a lot of people have hung on to AIM, but
gone to AIM. Like they're actually going to AIM since MSN.
No, they're hanging on for dear life.
I got you.
The people that I know, but everybody's using Facebook chat now.
I always think, in this sort of weird little Microsoft subset of the universe that I live in, there are people, not guys, women too, but people who are on Windows Live Messenger, and they tend to be older people, my age, and Microsoft oriented. But I obviously they have hundreds of millions of subscribers, so maybe I'm misreading this market, but I just don't think this is the future of online communications.
The chat, the personal chat.
Well, through Windows Live Messenger. I think that, and I'm not saying it's Facebook, although I'd say right now I think the ideal place for this stuff, aside from the privacy implications of Facebook, of course, but I mean, as far as just sheer number of people and sheer number of people you actually know, Facebook's pretty good for that stuff. And everyone I know is on Facebook, so
but
I don't use it for chat, but I could.
Again, you said it perfectly. I mean, you would get this client and you would send an email out to everybody you know saying, hey, I want this client. But
I actually think the reason my friend was so freaked about ICQ is it might have done it automatically. In fact, God knows what this would have looked like in 1994-ish, but you could almost imagine as part of setup, it's like, hey, we could let everyone you know that you were using this. Do you want us to do that? And she'd be like, oh, yeah, of course I do. And then it might have sent out emails, and maybe he got one of these things and he was like, what?
I remember ICQ was never pretty. ICQ was always gray and green. And one interesting feature they had was real-time typing. So as you typed, it showed, I think you would have to enable it, but it showed the person typing and hitting backspace.
It was like that old Unix chat thing where you could have, you were on the top and they were on the bottom, and you could actually see as you were.
That's exactly what it was like. So if you wrote, go to hell,
they could
see that, and then you're like, oh, I'm going to change my mind. I'm going to be nice to this person. It was, and they had some weird thing with file transfers. I think they were better at file transfers than another client would have been, but I don't know why you wouldn't have used an FTP at that point.
Yep.
It's fascinating because a lot of people don't even know what an FTP is anymore. Nobody uses it.
I know.
Nobody's using it.
I barely use FTP. I use it to upload chapters and images to the publisher. And I used to use it for updating my website, but I don't actually use that anymore. So FTP is a lot like, well, I bet Usenet's still in wide use.
We use FTP on the network.
But as far as a percentage of the online population,
no.
I bet that Gopher is obviously long gone. FTP is dropping off the map, I would have to think, and then Usenet, is probably the next. I mean, web forums kind of make more sense.
Well, Usenet has a very niche group of users now, and
well, they're stealing software. It's just stealing movies or whatever. Yeah, exactly. And by the way, that's not a good model for future success.
Isn't that funny though? I mean, I've got to. We were discussing this last week after the show, and I went and I was looking up some of the companies, and some of them blatantly just say, no tracking. No one will know what you're doing.
You can pay to get onto a Usenet service. In other words, they have their own servers. These servers are unfettered. If you as a Verizon Fios customer probably have access to some subset of Usenet that
not anymore. Verizon totally eliminated Usenet. Yeah.
Well, because that's what people were using it for. In other words, Fios plus Usenet equals what?
Oh yeah. I'm going to be sitting there and downloading,
theft,
everything in the world. But
I have a 25 megabit connection. I wonder what's playing tonight on Usenet.
But I mean, they can't eliminate that. We find BitTorrent is such a huge part of. Well,
actually,
this.
BitTorrent is a good example of something that is a more recent technology that actually may make more sense than Usenet even for that particular illegal activity. Although there's no reason BitTorrent couldn't be used for legal activities, it just never has been.
But you know what's interesting about BitTorrent? And we're coming from the Kazaa and Morpheus and MySpace, Napster. These clients were so simple, anybody could use it. Everybody was on there. Every. I
did. I was on Napster for a while. I did LimeWire for a little while. But at some point, and maybe we should credit Apple for this, even though it wasn't completely Apple's doing. But I always felt like, and now practice the notion that if you make this stuff inexpensive enough and high quality enough, I am perfectly happy to buy music.
Yeah, me
and
too.
Movies and whatever TV shows, etc. Right? And
I'll pay for it. Just make it easy for me.
Yeah. I think the big, for college students and younger people, obviously the big advantage of Napster was it was free, but give them some credit. They also made it very easy, and they created that humongous community of users where you could get on there. It's like you're on stage. I need this thing, and then it would just pop up.
Here you go, yeah. But see, BitTorrent doesn't have that luxury, and BitTorrent is a little difficult and might be a little intimidating for somebody that doesn't necessarily understand that they have to download this BitTorrent file, then get a client, and they need to have the client running in order to run this file to grab it. Like the concept of it might be a little too much for somebody.
Yeah, but don't you want those people off of BitTorrent anyway?
I just want them off the internet. Because I'm the one that gets the call. Andrew, I don't know what this thing does, but I don't know.
I got
Nothing
a magnet
works.
file. What do I need? What do I do with this?
I was, during the LimeWire years, I was racking in the money because I was doing PC repair and I was helping friends and family out, and I ended up starting charging, and I started a little company for myself. And I was just blown away by how many people would click on, random files, and it would just infect everything, and they would just download it. And most of the time it was porn.
Well, by the way, the reason I mentioned earlier I have my friend's computer here to fix it, I can assure you the reason it's here to be fixed is because he clicks on anything.
He clicks on anything, yeah.
He's a smart guy, a really smart guy. But
I'm the type, I freak out when there's an ask.com set as my default for my browser.
There's nothing worse. It may have been his computer, but you'll occasionally open a computer where the browser takes about a minute to load because literally there are 6 toolbars that have to occur before this thing is up and running, and it's like, really? It never thought to look to turn those off, huh?
By the way, the chat room is having a great time at listing BitTorrent sites.
Nice.
They're having a great time here with it.
Sure. Well, BitTorrent, I use BitTorrent actually, and I use it to download leaked builds of Windows 8, for example, is one recent thing. I don't use it to download movies or whatever, although I assume that stuff is out there.
But you know what I want?
Trying to imagine what else would be on there. There's no real legitimate BitTorrent.
But I was going to say, how to use it in a legitimate way, because the speeds are fast and the seating is great, and if I have a great connection, you have a great connection, you could grab this thing in no time. How can
I would imagine that in the business plan of some company, either the company that invented BitTorrent or one of the clients like the uTorrent people or somewhere, their thought was, we will ally with music companies and we'll get them to somehow license BitTorrent so that this is used in the background for the downloading of legitimate movies or content or whatever it was.
Isn't that what
these
YouTube is
people
doing?
were just laughed out of these rooms because they look like pirates, and they kind of are pirates.
But YouTube is doing that in a sense, because if you're listening to a song that was, obviously it's not some kid uploads to YouTube and it's a song or a music video, there's a little link on the bottom that says, if you want to download the song on iTunes, click here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and companies like Apple and Microsoft and whoever else have, not to solve the quality problem, but they figured out how to efficiently use bandwidth to download big files and all that stuff. And it's just, BitTorrent is a good idea. Technically, it's just that by the nature of life, it's been used for bad, and I just don't see that changing. I just think it's kind of what happened to Usenet. The people who are still on Usenet today, well, maybe I shouldn't say that. That's kind of a gross generalization, but I bet there's a huge percentage of people who are in Usenet today that use it as if it were a BitTorrent, just for that purpose. They're stealing files. Last night's episode of a TV show that they missed, or they don't pay for TV, so I'm going to download it today, or whatever. Software, I'm sure there's all kinds of stuff.
But you bring up an interesting point. There's so much on TV that they can release on Hulu or even Netflix or whatever the options are, and allow people to legally purchase it and legally watch it in whatever way they want to do it.
Okay,
but it doesn't exist for many things.
Yeah, Hulu is wildly inconsistent, and frankly, the notion of a service that you pay for where what you're downloading is reruns of TV shows is not a huge or not a great business model in my mind. I think that if you were to, I think the ideal thing for something like that is, again, like I said, I don't mind the notion of paying for something. I have done this occasionally, but I don't often do something like subscribe to a TV show season on iTunes. But I do feel that if you do that and you're paying for this thing up front, one of the advantages of it should be sometime before that thing airs on network TV, you should have it. Okay. You shouldn't get it later. You should get it before. You're explicitly paying.
That's interesting.
For this content.
So you think, well, yeah, that does make sense.
The TV should be
some sort of perk.
The redheaded stepchild in this equation, or however you want to say it, the poor experience, because those people are not paying directly for this thing. They're paying kind of for it through advertising and whatnot. A lot of them are DVRing it and skipping through the commercials anyway. I mean, when you're paying explicitly for content, you should be treated as the king that you are to these people, because that has to be the most lucrative form of direct to consumer payment that you could possibly make. Or direct from consumer payment, I guess.
Yeah, Paul. Unfortunately, we have reached the end.
As we must.
We only really discussed 2 topics because we just spoke. But as long as the viewers like it, doesn't matter to me. I could talk about nothing, which I do many times, and I'm sure I'll get an email.
Our memories of AOL could take Many hours.
Oh, many hours. Those server rooms. I want to remind everybody, go to our website, guysfromqueens.com. All the shows are archived at guysfromqueens.com. Also, you can watch live at gfqlive.tv. Thank you, Brian, for liking the show. You can check out Paul's website, winsupersite.com. Is the ultrabook post on WinSupersite?
It used to be, but actually, I had to search for it, so I found it. It's on the Windows IT Pro site.
Okay, so I will post a link in our show notes to that.
I think I think if you change the link to say WinSupersite instead of Windows IT Pro, it would work. But it doesn't matter. It's the same article.
So I'll post a link on the website to that because it was another great blog and another great article written by the what did I call you? Magical Paul Thurrott.
Magical. Yeah.
Yeah. Paul, thank you again for joining me today. I appreciate it.
No problem at all. Thank you for having me.
I'm now going. It's my anniversary, so we're going out to dinner.
How many years?
3 years.
3 years.
3 years. We've been married together for 6.
You know, I've been married for 21 years, so I'm reminded of the episode of The Simpsons where they were making fun of South Park, and Homer said, "Wow, they've been on the air for 3 years. How do they keep it so fresh?" You know, or whatever the years was. But anyway, I don't mean to mock you. That's fantastic.
You know, we had the whole discussion like, oh, we'll go out to the city and we'll leave like at 3 o'clock. I'm like, no, Paul, I have to do a show with Paul, and I use you as an excuse once again.
Oh
and
boy!
I said I can't move the show today. Paul has no other days available to do the show.
He's actually here. Yeah.
So I was able to do the show because Paul can't do any other days.
Please apologize to your wife then.
Oh no, I just keep telling her horrible things about you.
Okay.
Every time I disagree with her, Paul Thurrott said.
I'm going to stop telling you when I come to New York. I don't want to be ambushed.
We'll see y'all next week on What the Tech. Good night, everybody.